Owl Moon by Jane Yolen, illustrated by John Schoenherr. How are you today, my friends? How are you today? I hope that you're okay, my friend. Oh, deep in my heart, I want to say, I hope that you're okay today. Hi, how are you? I have to tell you that I am feeling a little bit sad today. So not perfectly okay. I have a close friend, a young person who I know very well, who is going to be leaving school sooner than I thought this friend was going to be leaving school. And it turns out I'm probably not going to see this friend again. And I'm just feeling a little bit sad about that. But I have to tell you that the fact that I'm here with you is really helpful, and it brings me joy. And another thing that brings me joy, I was hanging out with my friend Sarah today, and she said, Mr. Gregory, or Mr. Greg, she actually calls me Gregory. Gregory, I want you to wear the striped shirt with the skeleton. So I wore the striped shirt with the skeleton. First, because Sarah asked me, and it brings her joy because Sarah's favorite pattern at this point are stripes. And second, this shirt brings me quite a bit of joy. It was created for me by my goddaughter. And so it's a one-of-a-kind t-shirt that I think is really cool and funky. And you're here, and we have this beautiful, beautiful book, Owl Moon. And I have to tell you that both the words by Jane Yolen and the illustrations by John Schoenherr are just beautiful and amazing and among my favorite. In fact, the story is almost like a poem. There's a lot of very beautiful writing that uses analogy. Do you know what analogy means? It's when I'll use language for one thing, but it uses something else. So I might say, I'm as hungry as a moose, or something like that. And I'm not a moose. And I don't really know how hungry a moose is, but I'm expressing that I'm super duper hungry by saying hungry as a moose. Or I might say, those colors reminded me of a bright rainbow singing a beautiful song. Now, of course, a bright rainbow isn't able to sing a song, but there's something beautiful about some things that I see or hear that sort of bring to mind beautiful colors like a rainbow, but also bring to mind beautiful songs at the same time. And sometimes when I see a really beautiful, bright, sometimes a double rainbow, have you ever seen one of those? It makes me want to sing. So I do think of a beautiful song associated with a rainbow, which is a thing you look at. And all of that language is kind of poetic and not exact. This book is full of so much poetic language. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the illustrations up to you, but I'm going to read the book back here. So let's take a look at the jacket first, because this illustration is just simply amazing. You can see that the illustrator is using probably pencil, but then also watercolors. Look at the use of watercolors there. I'm not used to seeing watercolors be able to make trees that really, really look like trees, or people that really, really look like people. Oftentimes, the art that I see and appreciate in watercolor is more abstract, meaning a thing doesn't exactly look like the thing it's supposed to be. But these illustrations are vibrant, they're colorful, primary, secondary, tertiary colors, shades, tints, all of these things. So this is a story about a child and a father, who go owling. It was late one winter night, long past my bedtime, when Pa and I went owling. There was no wind. The trees stood still as giant statues, and the moon was so bright the sky seemed to shine. Somewhere behind us a train whistle blew, long and low, like a sad, sad song. Sometimes when I hear train whistles blow, I think of sad, sad songs. It's beautiful language, right? Now let's take a look at this farm where these two people are going to start their adventure. And we can see, I'll come in really close for you. You can see they're the two people leaving the house. There are their footprints. We can see shadows because the moon is so bright that it almost is like the sunlight, and it's casting shadows from the house. It's beautiful, yeah? So many hues of whites and grays and blues and silvers, and then this beautiful reddish brown right in the middle. By the way, there will be many animals in this book. We will try to point them out. I could hear it through a woolen cap Pa had pulled down over my ears. A farm dog answered the train. Oh! And then a second dog joined in. Oh, oh, oh! They sang out, trains and dogs, for a real long time. And when their voices faded away, it was quiet as a dream. We walked on towards the woods, Pa and I. Notice our animal friend in this picture. Let me get him to focus there. Say wolf or a fox. Of course we see Pa and the narrator, who is the child. Those beautiful trees, watercolors and pencils. Our feet crunched over the crisp snow, and little gray footprints followed us. Pa made a long shadow, but mine was short and round. I had to run after him every now and then to keep up, and my short round shadow bumped after me. But I never called out. If you go owling, you have to be quiet. That's what Pa always says. I had been waiting to go owling with Pa for a long, long time. You see, just as he described, there's Pa and his very long shadow. And there's our narrator with his very short, round shadow. And you notice he said that the footprints were following them. Sometimes it feels like your footprints are following you, even though you left them and they're not going anywhere. And in that tree, we see a friend, don't we? There's a bird in the tree. By the way, I also spy with my little eye a bird's nest right up here. That's fun. I didn't notice that before. We reached the tree line of pines, black and pointy against the sky, and Pa held up his hand. I stopped right where I was and waited. He looked up as if searching the stars, as if reading a map up there. The moon made his face into a silver mask. Then he called, "Woo, woo, 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 woo." The sound of the great horned owl. Woo, 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 woo. This is a close-up illustration where we can see Pa doing his great horned owl and the young person with the scarf on, pine trees with snow in the background, a very long tree,
And a tiny little animal friend. Perhaps a field mouse here? Let's get you in focus, Mr. Field Mouse. Come on, buddy. There you go. See him down there? I don't want to mess up the focus. There he is.
And he called out again, woo, 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 woo. And then again. After each call, he was silent. And for a moment, we both listened. But there was no answer. Pa shrugged, and I shrugged. I was not disappointed. My brothers all said, sometimes there's an owl, and sometimes there isn't. Now, this next illustration is so beautiful to me because it's from the perspective, almost perhaps of the owl. It's almost as if we're seeing Pa and the child from way up high in a tree, and perhaps it is the great horned owl looking down. You'll see what I mean when I come up to the... See that? That's perspective. We're looking above them. We can see their backs. We can also see another little friend there in the tree. See him? The little raccoon. Perhaps his name is Rocky. Rocky Raccoon. All of those shadows on the ground. This illustrator is truly making wonderful use of mixing colors and creating texture. We walked on. I could feel the cold, as if someone's icy hand was palmed down on my back. And my nose and the tops of my cheeks felt cold and hot at the same time. But I never said a word. If you go owling, you have to be quiet and make your own heat. And here we have an illustration of Pa and our illustrator walking. Pa with his very long legs, always a few feet ahead of the child or the narrator. All of those beautiful, darkish, grayish, greenish, sometimes even becoming black, right? Sometimes this illustrator added so much black that the green becomes obscured and looks black itself. And you know, if you're out late at night, colors can really look like that. It's a wonderful job with that illustration. We went into the woods. The shadows were the blackest things I had ever seen. They stained the white snow. My mouth felt furry, for the scarf over it was wet and warm. I didn't ask what kinds of things hide behind the black trees in the middle of the night. When you go owling, you have to be brave. And we can see the young narrator is a bit afraid, and I think Pa recognizes that because now Pa is holding his hand. And we Pa's know, right? We can sense, we know. And so he just holds the narrator's hand, and they're in the big woods with so many dark shadows, and it can seem scary at times. But to go owling, you have to be brave. And it also helps to have Pa holding your hand, doesn't it? Just seeing if we missed any animals on this page. I don't think we did. Then we came to a clearing in the dark woods. The moon was high above us. It seemed to fit exactly over the center of the clearing, and the snow below it was whiter than the milk in a cereal bowl. Do you remember when we read Kitten's First Full Moon? Well, here in the clearing, you'll see Pa and the narrator are walking this way into this clearing. A clearing means there are no trees. And the moon seemed to be right above the clearing because it's shining so bright there. And you see we have an animal friend in the shadows here, a deer laying down and watching. But of course the colors are vibrant here because the moon is shining like a bowl of milk. I sighed, and Pa held up his hand at the sound. I put my mittens over my scarf and over my mouth, and I listened hard, and Pa called, listened and looked so hard my ears hurt and my eyes got cloudy with the cold. Pa raised his face to call out again, but before he could open his mouth, an echo came threading its way through the trees. And do you know what that sound was? I'm going to play for you that sound. It was the great horned owl.
You see our young narrator is covering his mouth and he's super duper focusing, and Pa laid out that call and the owl called back.
Pa almost smiled, then he called back, "Woo, woo, 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 woo." Just as if he and the owl were talking about supper or about the woods or the moon or the cold. I took my mitten off the scarf, off my mouth, and I almost smiled too. You could hear a duet between the two.
You see, Pa seems to see something, doesn't he? Perhaps he's looking in the direction from where the call came. I just love how this illustrator has made this tree, because trees do grow very oddly sometimes. Interesting angles.
Because the trees are constantly trying to find the sunlight. And so sometimes they'll curve this way, and sometimes trees get very large and gnarled and have bumpy fat spots, and other times trees are very thin and craggly. You should look at different trees. They're also different and beautiful. Much like people, very different and beautiful. The owl's call came closer. Let's listen. Whew. From high in the trees on the edge of the meadow, nothing in the meadow moved. All of a sudden, an owl shadow, part of the big tree shadow, lifted off and flew right over us. We watched silently with heat in our mouths, the heat of all those words we had not spoken. The shadow hooted again.
It's hard to spot, but the owl is right up here. Very large wingspan. You can see his shadow down on the ground. There's Pa and the narrator, and way up there, look at that wingspan. Such a wide owl.
Pa turned on his big flashlight and caught the owl just as it was landing on a branch. This is such a beautiful view
from just behind the owl, and Pa shining the spotlight on him. Their faces are in amazement. See that? Amazement.
I wonder if we're going to have the opportunity to see the front of the owl. We are. For 1 minute, 3 minutes, maybe even 100 minutes, we stared at one another. I know. It sounds like, is that Steve Buscemi in there? Well, Steve Buscemi's name, of course, we know, is Will Ferrell. Or is that you, Anderson Pooper? Anyway, let's have a look at this beautiful, great horned owl.
My goodness, is it beautiful. Very intense. Very, very intense eyes. Do you ever notice in owls, many owls, the way their eyes are shaped and their brows are shaped, they appear as though they're frowning. Now, they're not humans, so they're not frowning. They're just owls. But it looks like he could be angry just because of the way
his brow is. But he's not angry. He's just an owl. But sometimes we see, as humans, we'll see animals and they might look scary because we think their faces look like a human face. You have to remember, they're not. They're animal faces. Then the owl pumped its great wings and lifted off the branch like a shadow without a sound. It flew back into the forest. "Time to go home," Pa said to me. I knew then I could talk. I could even laugh out loud. But I was a shadow as we walked home. I was a shadow. It's a beautiful piece of symbolism. The child knew, the narrator knew that he could laugh or talk, but he became a shadow. He became a piece of he and his father walking back from what they had just seen.
Right, and the boy didn't really become a shadow, but he was like a shadow. He was silent and tagged behind his father. And that owl flew away with his furrowed-looking brow. Very intense.
When you go owling, you don't need words or warm or anything but hope. That's what Pa says. The kind of hope that flies on silent wings under a shining owl moon. And the final illustration is also absolutely beautiful.
See, Pa is carrying the narrator home in between the two tall, thin trees.
I appreciate you being here with me today, and I feel considerably happier and more joyful to have spent the time with you and reading this beautiful poetic book and seeing the beautiful watercolors. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I trust that I will see you again early next week, likely Monday. I hear crickets as well. Do you hear crickets? And there's the owl again, the great horned owl. Woo, 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 woo. Can you do a great horned owl? I'm sure you can. Woo, 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 woo. It is as if they're saying, whoo, and you go, me. Anyway, mwah. I'll talk to you later.